Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of PowerCore Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, Jerron Harrington, back to hit you with another video. And today, we're going to be starting a series that I've been working on for a while now. A unique what if that looks into a particular Spider-Man universe and seeing how just by changing a few things, we can come to such a different and drastic outcome. For this story, we're going to be delving into the Sam Raimi Spider-Man universe, and we're going to be looking at one moment that I believe that if we change, we can come out with a much new and different story. This is going to be, what if Dr. Octopus from Spider-Man 2 became the Superior Spider-Man? For those unfamiliar with who the Superior Spider-Man is, the Superior Spider-Man storyline sees where a Dr. Octopus, on his deathbed, tries to get one over on Spider-Man one last time by switching both of their consciousness. However, in the process of doing so, Dr. Octopus finds himself taking on the virtues of a hero, but still with a bit of his old tendencies, wanting to prove that he truly is the best that there could ever be, even better than his arch foe Spider-Man. As such, he takes on the moniker of becoming the Superior Spider-Man, proving that he could do a better job than our Peter Parker ever could. So this story, I would like to follow a unique version of the Superior Spider-Man. Starting at the end or the climax of Spider-Man 2, we're going to see what would happen if Dr. Otto Octavius, instead of meeting his watery death, was instead given a second chance at life, a second chance to use his knowledge for the good of mankind. I now present to you, what if Dr. Octopus from Spider-Man 2 became the Superior Spider-Man? Part 1. As always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Our story begins towards the final climax of Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man and Dr. Octopus would work together to destroy the machine. Instead of in the original timeline, where Peter would take Mary Jane away and watch as Dr. Otto Octavius would drag down the device that he had created, plunging it under the waters so as not to destroy the city. Peter would quickly get Mary Jane to safety before going back to help the doctor, believing that if the two of them worked together, then they could be able to survive. Spider-Man would shoot his webbing all around the device and try to swim and bring it down, along with Dr. Octopus, using all 4 of his limbs. As they worked together, they would find themselves being sucked up into a vortex of sorts, the heat and combustible elements exploding all around them. Peter and Otto thought that this was going to be the end of them, and for a moment it was, until it wasn't. Before long, the two would wash back up on the shores of New York. As they did so, there was something different about them. As Peter awoken, he would look and see that he wasn't quite himself. As for the same was with Otto. It somehow happened. Somehow, some way, the radiation from the device, it had somehow managed to switch both of their consciousness. Now, Otto Octavius was in the body of Peter Parker, and Peter Parker somehow found himself in the body of Dr. Otto Octavius. Unfortunately for Dr. Octopus, his body was not in a good state, meaning that Peter was going to die. As Io realized what had happened, this wasn't what he wanted. He didn't want to trade places. He had to serve his penance for his crimes, for everything he had done. Peter had been the one to save him, to keep him from swaying down the wrong path. But now it seemed as though Peter was doomed to suffer and die. Using his last remaining moments, Peter would look to Io, telling him that he had a chance now to do the right thing. Even in his dying moments, the only thing Peter cared for was for the safety of the city and those he cared for. He would ask Io for two things. One, that he would be the best hero that he could be, and that two, he would watch over and protect Mary Jane and Aunt May. Io was overcome with emotions, unsure of what he should do. This wasn't what he had ever wanted, but now it seemed as though this was the life he was going to live. Io tried desperately to come up with a plan, to try to save them, to try to fix this. However, Peter would die in Io's body, now leaving him in this current state. With nothing else for him to do, Io would swing over to Mary Jane. Mary Jane having just figured out Spider-Man's identity as Peter Parker. However, now, it would be the consciousness of Io Octavius. Even though Mary couldn't tell completely, as she looked into Peter's eyes, she felt as though things weren't quite the same. Of course, this was still the body of Peter Parker, but there was something about the eyes. When she looked into them, she felt as though she weren't looking into the eyes of Peter Parker anymore, but as if she were looking into the eyes of someone else. Io had to think logically. With the little bit of access that he had to Peter's memories, he would try to take the best course of action. He would come up with the logical conclusion that it would be best for Mary Jane to move on, to marry J.J. Jonah's son, John Jonah Jameson, believing this would be the best course of action for her, knowing that if she were to be involved with him in his life, she would always be in danger. Mary Jane would protest to this, but Peter would make it very clear that he wasn't going to accept a relationship with her. In the end, she would be better off being happy with someone who wanted to be with her, and someone who could truly give her something that he never could. As the police would arrive, John Jonah Jameson also arriving to save his fiancée, Peter, or now Io, would swing off into the night. As he returned home, to Peter's home, Io would try to unravel everything that had taken place. What he was going to make of his life now. He had a new identity, a fresh start, a second chance to make things right. What was he going to do? Would he learn from his mistakes and change for the better? Or would he be stubborn, stuck in his ways, and not only ruin his own reputation, but also the reputation of someone who he held in high regard? As he took a deep breath, Io would go through the things in the small apartment before understanding what he needed to do. The next day, before her wedding, Mary Jane would stop to visit Peter's apartment, hoping to find him. However, sadly, he was not home. Taking this as a sign that Peter truly did not want to have anything to do with her, she would resolve in her heart to make the best of a new life with John Jonah Jameson, and as such, she would go on with the marriage, not in the original timeline where she had stood him up at the altar. The marriage would go off without a hitch, although there would be a difference. Earlier that day, Peter, or now Io, would have arrived to the Daily Bugle to inform J. Jonah Jameson that he was going to be quitting and he was not going to be the photographer for the wedding. JJ would be extremely angered about this. However, Io would stand up for himself, not wanting to put up with the bull of J. Jonah Jameson any longer. Even if Io was going to turn over to a new leaf, the one thing he was not going to do was subjugate himself to a demeaning job, working for someone who only seemed to want to slander him every chance he got. Now free from the Daily Bugle, Otto would turn to trying to rebuild the life of Peter Parker. One of his course of action would be to stop by and visit Harry Osborn. Now going through the old memories of Peter Parker, he would be able to realize what happened between he and the Green Goblin, aka Norman Osborn. He would stop to pay Harry a visit. However, Harry would still be angry with him, understandably so. Otto would try to reason and explain that he didn't kill his father, but that his father had killed himself, attempting to kill not only him, but also Mary Jane, as well as many others in New York. Harry, however, wouldn't want to hear it, threatening him to leave now or suffer the consequences. With no choice, Otto would leave and get to work on rebuilding his life. Slowly but surely, he would be able to put together the foundations for Parker Industries, patenting many new inventions as well as other marvels and technical advancements, trying to live up to his creed of using his knowledge for the betterment and the good of mankind. In doing so, he would gain recognition and honors, and he would even excel in college. Of course, with the mind of Otto Octavius, this wasn't a shock at all. But to his professors, it would be like a marvel. Suddenly, it seemed as though Peter had figured everything out. With Otto and proper planning, he wouldn't have to be late for things. He was able to find balance in his life and what he wanted to do. One of his professors who would really take note of this would be Dr. Kirk Connors, who would want to work with Peter, now seeing his true brilliance on display, not knowing that this in fact was actually Otto Octavius. Dr. Connors had actually been working on something for a while now, a growth serum that could help restore his missing right arm. Now seeing just how well that Peter had been applying himself, he believed that he might actually have the key to helping him unlock his true potential. As such, Otto would work with Dr. Connors in building a formula that they could use to regrow missing limbs. As he worked and helped with Dr. Connors, he would also take a new approach in his role as Spider-Man. Wanting to be superior in every way, Otto would update the version of the suit that Peter used to use. Instead of the iconic blue and red, it would instead be a hybrid of black and red, similar to that of the superior Spider-Man suit as seen. He would also build for himself 4 robotic mechanical limbs, like spiders, that would attach to the back of the suit, similar to how he used his mechanical arms, although this time he made sure to work out the defect so that it wouldn't fuse to his body like it had before. Following his role as the new and improved superior Spider-Man, Otto would take his role as defender of the city very seriously, wanting to be more efficient and much more practical than even Peter was. He would work by building an army of small spider robots that would watch over the city and alert him to different threats and crimes in areas, letting him know where he needed to be and when. As such, crime would go down rapidly in the city, making it much more safer than when it had even began. In the meantime, he would continue to help Dr. Connors, wanting to improve upon the serum. They would look to using an animal compound that used within reptiles, as they had the ability to regrow their limbs also. However, one problem that they ran into was finding a stabilizing compound, something that could bind the animal and human blood together perfectly. Otto would believe that he might have had the idea. Taking it back home, he would take a sample of his own blood. After all, Spider-Man's blood was the perfect combination between human and spider. Then maybe the missing link or the compound could be within himself. Using that as the base, he would use and complete the formula before bringing it back to Dr. Connors. They would decide to test it out on a dog that had a missing limb. They waited to see the results, and after only a day, the dog's limb would regrow perfectly. Seeing this as a miracle, Dr. Connors not wanting to wait any longer, would test the serum upon himself. The two would wait to see what would happen, and then eventually a miracle, as they would see Dr. Connor's right arm would have been restored to what it was originally. Now riding high on his success, the two were preparing to show off the serum to the world, Otto looking forward to using it as one of the building blocks for Parker Industries. In the meanwhile, Harry would become annoyed and angered, seeing who he believed to be his father's murderer gaining more wealth and praise. The idea of Parker Industries potentially rising to be a rival to Oscorp was starting to hurt his ego more and more. He would find himself walking to the expo on opening night, where Peter and Dr. Connors were going to show off their new serum to the public. However, as they waited, Dr. Connors would not have arrived. In the meantime, Otto's robotic spiders would give an alert to a monstrous creature in the downtown area that seemed to be going on a rampage. Peter would sneak from the function and suit up as he followed the destruction, seeing claw marks and destruction of cars and other buildings, as it seemed whatever this creature was making its way down into the sewers in the depths below. He would follow it into the darkness of the night, unaware of what was around him, his spider sense going off at the last moment, as he found himself face to face with a monstrous lizard humanoid creature. From the tattered clothing that was around this lizard-like beast, Otto could see that the name tag of Dr. Kurt Connors was on it. Realizing what had happened, something must have gone wrong with the experiment. Spider-Man would engage with the lizard within the depths of the sewers, his monstrous strength proving to be a match for even his own. Something must have gone wrong with the formula, and he believed that his blood had to be the key. They would fight for a good amount of distance, Spider-Man using his robotic arms to block away at the claws of the lizard, as he attempted to try to reason with Dr. Connors and get him under control. However, he wouldn't get the chance to, and instead, the lizard, now having taken full control, would attempt to drag Spider-Man down into the murky waters of the sewer, to drown and then rip him to shreds. Although thankfully, before they could do so, Spider-Man would lure him lower into the sewers, before kicking him down a large drain basin, hoping that he would stay down there long enough for him to figure something out, as he closed off the port, hoping that he would be sealed inside. Realizing that he had made a terrible mistake, Spider-Man would rush back to Dr. Connor's home, attempting to find the information that they had on the formula to try to engineer a cure. As he had done so, the dog that had been inside of the home had transformed into a lizard dog-like monster. With no choice, Spider-Man would have to kill it and put it down, taking the body and destroying its evidence to make sure that it couldn't be linked back to Dr. Connors. With that, Spider-Man would get to work on a cure immediately, hoping that he could reverse the damage that had been done and save a close friend of his in time. Meanwhile, Harry Osborn, now leader and owner of Oscorp, would be approached by the mayor of the city, along with the police task force, as they realized they were fighting against something that was not of this human nature. Hoping that Oscorp could provide some scientific knowledge, or equip them with weapons capable of taking down this lizard-like monster before it rampaged through New York. Harry would see this as an opportunity for the company to grow in wealth. Harry would demand that they turn over the capture of the lizard to Oscorp, and as a reward for bringing the lizard in, Oscorp would be allowed to keep it and study it for future growth in technologies. Agreeing with his demands, Harry would mobilize a task force, a small militia, and arm them with the best weapons that Oscorp could create. The task force would be sent to chase after the lizard and capture it. Harry also gave the personal order that if Spider-Man got involved, they were not to hesitate to use lethal force against him. The militia would make their way to the sewers and begin their hunt for the lizard. At the same time, Spider-Man, now having figured a way to engineer cure, would make his way towards where the militia were congregating, as it seemed as though everyone was setting their sights upon the lizard. Eventually, they would make their way to an abandoned factory as they were attempting to smoke him out before using their upgraded weapons to capture him. Just as the operation was about to begin, Spider-Man would get involved as well. The militia, following the orders given to them by Harry, would attempt to take out Spider-Man then and there. This entering into a three-way battle, the lizard slicing away and cutting at the various armed guards attempting to bring him in, while Spider-Man fought off another horde of guards. In the midst of the chaos, Spider-Man would try to administer the cure to Otto, using it as a way to try to save Dr. Connors. However, before he could get a chance to do so, one of the militia guards would use a concussive bomb, sending a large sonic boom, almost deafening Spider-Man, as well as stunning the lizard, long enough for them to use specially made restraints, eventually capturing and subduing the lizard as they attempted to bring him back to Oscorp, while the remaining forces attempted to take out Spider-Man. However, he was able to get his wits about him and defeat the guards before they could apprehend him, as he would turn his sights and make his way towards Oscorp. Harry would be waiting as he would get confirmation of how the operation was going. Just as they were bringing in the lizard and the preparations were being made to sedate the monstrous creature and keep him in hibernation until they could begin their test studies, the alarms would go off, signaling that Spider-Man had entered into the building. Harry would be absolutely furious, thinking that Peter was getting in his way once again. The various guards would attempt to try to subdue Spider-Man as he fought past them to make his way towards the lizard. At the same time, Curt Connors was beginning to wake up, and the lizard would start to grow in strength, breaking just one of his restraints, being enough for the others to break free soon after. Now the lizard was running on a rampage throughout Oscorp. Harry would make sure that the building was shut down. If the lizard escaped from Oscorp, the optics could be bad for the public. Harry would suit up in riot gear of his own, arming himself with specially made tranquilizing guns, along with other weapons, as he would confront both Spider-Man and the lizard as they fought into the various laboratories of Oscorp. Just when it seemed as though the lizard was about to get its way with Spider-Man, Harry would run into the room, shooting away at the lizard. The tranquilizers didn't take effect immediately, and the lizard would turn his attentions back towards Harry, jumping at him as Harry took another gun, attempting to shoot him down. As he did so, the lizard would slash at Harry's face, scarring him just a bit as he was sent flying against the wall. Before the lizard could do any more damage, Spider-Man would jump onto his back, stabbing him in the neck with the serum and binding him with his webbing, waiting as it slowly began to take hold over him, until eventually the lizard would transform back into Dr. Connors, who was in a bit of a comatose state, knocked out and unsure of where he was. As Spider-Man picked up Dr. Connors preparing to leave, he would turn back his attention looking towards Harry, Harry slowly getting back on his feet once more. He would simply look up to him and ask if he was going to kill him the same way that he had killed his father. Spider-Man said nothing. He simply would take Dr. Connors and leave Oscorp. When asked about what they wanted to do, Harry would tell them to stand down, knowing that if this information got out to the public, it could mean bad news for Oscorp, and potentially have them investigated. Before long, Dr. Connors would wake up in the hospital where Peter would be sitting beside him. He would ask what had happened, and Peter would explain that the experiment went a little bit awry, but thankfully, Spider-Man was able to save him, and he promised that they would still figure out a way to one day restore his arm. But for now, he presented him a well-made prosthetic that could be functional in the meantime. Peter would destroy the research that they had done. Otto, making a vow that he would have to do better. He knew that he would need to, not only for himself, but for the city of New York. One evening, following his visit to Aunt May, checking on her and making sure that she was doing okay, he would make his way out to the town for dinner. While stopping at a restaurant, a woman would catch his eye. The woman dressed in black with silver hair. He would see that she was rather beautiful. As he walked over and approached her, he would introduce himself. The young woman would do so also, revealing her name to be Felicia Hardy. The two would strike up a conversation, and they would actually enjoy each other's company, as their dinners solo became sort of an unofficial date. The nighttime passed on, and before long, the two were joking and laughing with one another, and getting along very well. As their dinner came to an end, Peter and Felicia would exchange phone numbers, hoping that they could meet once more. Leaving the restaurant and preparing to go home, Otto's spider sense would go off at a moment's notice. However, before he had time to react, he would find himself being carried into the air. He would shoot his webbing at a building nearby, flipping over and landing as he looked to see who was facing him. Standing before him was someone dressed in a suit very similar to that of the Green Goblin, except this suit was actually all silver, with an orange cloak bellowing in the wind as well as an orange hood. Under the silver goblin mask, Otto could tell right through the visor of the eyes staring back at him, eyes that were filled with nothing but hatred. Otto would simply reply, like father, like son, as the eyes from under the mask looked back towards him, uttering a simple sentence. "You knew this was coming, Pete." This concludes What If Doc Ock from Spider-Man 2 Became the Superior Spider-Man, Part 1. As always, if you're a fan of today's video and everything else that we have to offer, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that has to come out now and in the future. Also, if you haven't gotten a chance, check out some of our other content on the channel as well, as there are always new and exciting stories just waiting to be explored. But anyway, until next time, I'm your host, Javon Harrington, signing off, and I'll see you soon.